I'm so extensively on the record about January 6th.
I know you are.
I'm completely appalled by it, but where I
still
differ from
endorsing
you
the guy.
guys.
You're not so appalled that you don't vote. You're not going to vote for Trump.
This is a different bill.
So you're not appalled.
No.
Right.
During a recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, a very fed-up Bill Maher shut down a prominent conservative writer who says that though he's outraged by what happened on January 6th, he's going to vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming election and doesn't understand why so-called principled conservatives like Liz Cheney are voting against Trump. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, this is something of a follow-up to a couple of videos I did over the weekend, and I mentioned in the first video I did over the weekend about this recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher that I was going to do multiple videos on it because I thought the exchange between Maher and John Avlon, former CNN host turned Democratic candidate, and Rich Lowry, the editor-in-chief of the conservative National Review, I thought their dynamic was really interesting. Bill Maher is somebody, as I've told you, who frustrates me quite a bit because he says he's liberal, and I think in a lot of ways he is, but he leans too much into quote-unquote enlightened centrist territory where, again, he grades Republicans, I think, in a lot of ways on a curve. Not always, a lot of ways, and he's too focused with niche culture war issues. But again, when it comes to Trump, when it comes to MAGA, when it comes to elected Republicans versus elected Democrats, Bill Maher is pretty good about shutting down the false equivalences. And so in the third and probably final video we're going to do about this episode, we're going to talk about another part in which Rich Lowry repeatedly talks about how he's outraged about January 6th and how he's written that he was outraged about January 6th. He condemned it, damn it. But Bill Maher and others on the panel are like, yeah, but you're voting for the guy who instigated it. So I want to play some of these clips and we'll unpack them together.
If Democrats did what Donald Trump did, you would be opposing him totally. And by the way, so would I.
Okay, so...
And I think that's the issue.
I'm so extensively on the record about January 6th.
I know you are.
I'm completely appalled by it, but where I
you're
differ
still
from
endorsing
you
the
guys.
guy.
You're not so appalled that you don't vote. You're not going to vote for Trump.
This is a different bill.
So you're not appalled.
No.
Right.
No, I am appalled. But the difference
But you're still going to vote for him.
If January 6th didn't happen, you would still oppose Trump because you don't like him on policy, right? From where I sit,
I don't. Mostly, no.
But you support Trump's policies?
I said no, mostly.
Right.
I think moving.
But you consider voting for him absent January 6th?
No.
Right. So,
well, consider. Yes, if he conceded elections, he would not be the boogeyman that he is. He would just not be the villain.
So what's interesting is Lowry did this thing where, well, listen, of course I'm appalled by January 6th. I've written extensively about how appalled I am. Bill Maher's point is, listen, you can claim to be as appalled as you want, but at the end of the day, if you're still willing to vote for the guy who did that appalling thing, it wasn't just an appalling thing, it was eminently disqualifying. This thing is so categorically different from other political or policy disagreements. But if you're going to vote for the guy who incited, who is morally and practically culpable for that appalling event, and you're going to vote for that guy anyway, then in effect, you don't find it particularly appalling because you don't want to punish him. You don't want to deter him. You actually want to reward him despite or perhaps because of this with a second term. And so Lowry is so dishonest. He's like, okay, but you're saying that as somebody who wouldn't vote for Trump in the first place. These two things have no relationship to one another. Prior to January 6th, there were legitimate policy-based and character-based reasons to still not vote for Donald Trump. However, there are prominent conservatives who like Trump, who even like Trump's policy, who even tolerated or perhaps liked aspects of Trump's character. But because he incited an insurrection, recognize that that appalling event is actually a disqualifying event and therefore won't back him accordingly. But Lowry is saying, well, listen, if you oppose Donald Trump prior to January 6th, or if January 6th didn't happen and you oppose him, you have no grounds to stand on here. It's no different from me backing Trump anyway, despite January 6th. What? No, the idea is January 6th was so uniquely disqualifying with respect to the conduct of a sitting chief executive that it shouldn't matter if you back him on policy because this is more important. The respect for the peaceful transfer of power in our democratic republic institutions should trump, pun intended, policy. But Rich Lowry can't grasp that. And so I want to play another clip from another part of this episode when it went into quote-unquote overtime.
What are your thoughts on Dick Cheney saying that he'll be voting for Kamala? Yeah,
right.
Liz Cheney said she would, and then she...
Isn't it great?
What do you think of that? Come on. When you lose Dick Cheney, Rich, come on,
isn't
man.
Politics funny, though? If someone had told you 20 years ago Dick Cheney would be endorsing the Democratic candidate for president, look, I get their, they can't stand Donald Trump and not being on board with Donald Trump. I do not get conservative Republicans supporting Kamala Harris. That does not.
But hold on. But let's work through it. It's not just about It's about one person wants to strengthen NATO and all the multilateral security arrangements that have helped keep the peace for the most part since the Second World War. The other wants to sell out to a lot of these autocratic countries. That's a personal, not political decision. I think that's actually consistent. Also, I think it's healthy because I think you get more Republicans endorsing Democrats. It makes the point that this election is about something bigger. It's about.
That's John Avalon, former CNN host, again turned Democratic candidate. But Rich Lowry says he can't fathom how a conservative Republican would vote for Vice President Harris. Well, Liz Cheney has made her reasons abundantly clear. We've played some recent clips from an interview that she had after she formally endorsed the vice president. I want to play a couple more, which should help contextualize why a principled conservative would, could, and indeed should support the vice president in the upcoming election as opposed to somebody like Donald Trump.
Obviously, I have and have had serious policy disagreements on a whole range of issues. Not on every issue, certainly, and we can talk about that. But my view very much is that those of us who believe in the defense of our democracy, in the defense of our Constitution, in the survival of our republic, have a duty in this election cycle to come together to put those things above politics. Right. And I look forward to the days when we will again be having debates about tax policy and national security policy and everything else, because that will mean that we have made it through what is right now a very grave threat to the functioning of the republic.
100%. Well, Liz Cheney is saying that for practical, principle, and moral reasons, there are some things, a few things, more important than policy. Like, people like Rich Lowry, and others, they like to dilute the criticism of Trump and saying, oh, it's about character. But character matters. And character, when character is driving, or the character of a person who has their hands on the levers of the greatest power in this country, it does matter. So listen, let's think of President Kennedy. Let's think of three presidents. Let's think of Trump, President Kennedy, President Clinton. Okay? Let's say all three of these men have, many things in common, unfortunately, but one of them is, let's take the example of infidelity. They were notorious philanderers. They cheated on their spouses. Now, I think we would all agree that if you are in a committed relationship or marriage, it's wrong to cheat on your spouse. We can all agree with that. Now, does that have any bearing necessarily on how they would be president? No, not necessarily. You could probably make the argument, but I would argue that the relationship between, fidelity to your marriage and fidelity to the Constitution, they're not necessarily super closely linked. So in theory, Donald Trump cheating on Melania doesn't necessarily mean he'd be a bad president, right? That's an aspect of character that Rich Lowry, I wouldn't disagree with Rich Lowry. If he said, if you vote on character, that means you could never vote for a philanderer. Well, ideally, the president wouldn't be a philanderer, but whatever. I recognize that some character traits exist more closely to the office in question than others. But Donald Trump's character is, he's not just a philanderer. He is a pathological liar. He's a malignant narcissist. He is vengeful. He is cruel. He's uncurious. He's unempathetic. He has an authoritarian streak a mile wide. These character traits matter because they have a direct connection to the office of the presidency. So character matters. And that bleeds into the broader topic, which again, Trump's policy, unfortunately, is fidelity to the system of governance. Again, I've given this example before, but if Barack Obama in 2012, even though I agreed with him more on policy than Governor Romney, if he was out there saying half the crap that Donald Trump is saying now about vengeance and retribution and third terms and stolen elections and not committing to the peaceful transfer of power, I would have voted for Mitt Romney. Even though Obama is eminently more preferable on policy because some, not all, but some things are more important than policy. You can't have good policy if you don't have a constitutional democratic republic. If it regresses, if it's a backsliding democracy. You can't have that. And that's what Trump poses. That's the risk Trump poses. That's what Liz Cheney is saying. So I'm stunned when people like Rich Lowry say that they can't fathom a conservative Republican voting against Trump or voting against a Republican candidate. Why not? Pretty damn good reasons. She gives another one here.
Combat the fact that even if Donald Trump loses, his ideology and dangerous rhetoric is still there, and it's being pushed by many people still in the party.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I think a big part of it is all of us as voters realizing how serious this endeavor is. And if you are somebody operating on the fringes of the Republican Party, well, it's not the fringes anymore. If you are somebody who has been elected to Congress and you think that your job every day is to get as many likes as possible on social media, for example, and you say the craziest things you can imagine, those people get a lot of positive reinforcement. And too often, the serious people sort of say, my God, I don't want any part of this. And the voters also say they just turn it off. And so what I would say is the only way we can change it is for the voters to understand this really matters. You don't have the luxury of saying, I'm going to ignore politics. You don't have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to vote in this election. We need people to also put their name on the ballot, to run for office, to understand that you cannot elect people that you wouldn't hire. Like, you can't make somebody, if you wouldn't trust someone, to babysit your kids, you probably shouldn't elect them president.
That's an excellent point. Again, we don't even have to take it that far. We can just say somebody you wouldn't hire. It's true. My God, look at, I've used this metaphor before, that voters should consider themselves hiring managers of a company, perhaps their company, perhaps they're the owner CEO, the owner operator of their own company, and they're thinking about hiring a manager, somebody in a key role, a key crucial role. And imagine you're looking at their resume, and the resume is number one, weak. And number two, when you call references or you call people who, like previous employers, previous coworkers, previous subordinates, and many of them say, do not hire this person because they're stupid, they're narcissistic, they're lazy, they're unreliable, whatever, you wouldn't hire them. And to that end, I'll end on this point, which is that Vice President Harris's campaign released a pretty devastating ad about a minute long, effectively making this point by pointing out that multiple key Trump administration officials are now speaking out against Trump. These would be the references in the hiring metaphor. If they wouldn't back this guy, and they know him a hell of a lot better than the vast majority of Trump supporters, why should anyone vote for him?
Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. It's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's highest-ranking military officer.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this.
Excellent ad, devastating ad with an irrefutable point. And I challenge anybody who disagrees, reach out to me. Let's talk about it, because I don't think you can make a credible defense of this. And in the meantime, folks, let me know what you think in the comments.